Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Mish Schneider, founder of MarketGauge.com, to discuss the recent move in stocks and thoughts around the economy and upcoming election. Mish, it's great to see you again. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thank you, Jill. Great to see you too.
Following the swift action we saw to the downside in recent trading sessions, would you say that the market has topped? Are there specific levels that you're watching?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure if it's actually topped yet. Having 10 to 15% corrections is sort of the norm when it comes to markets and has been going on, over 59% of the time you will see a 10 to 15% correction, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going into a sea change. The question on this one is not so much the technicals, because it held exactly, in terms of looking at Nasdaq and the S&P 500, they held exactly where they needed to on a 50-day moving average. What's going to be more interesting now is all of the stuff around that: vaccine, China, elections, civil unrest, all these things, oil prices tanking. This is going to be really, I think, the key of whether or not we can ignore that. The printing press keeps rolling, the stimulus package comes back, and then the market goes back to fantasy land. Right here, we're right in the middle from the high Thursday to when it started to crash to the low that we had yesterday. We're smack dab in the middle on our bounce.
Yeah, 2020 is the year that just continues to keep on giving. And there have been some bright spots in the economy like jobs, but there are still millions of Americans that will not have jobs to go back to with the hit small businesses are taking. Do you think a new stimulus package will make it through, because they still can't agree on any median here?
Because it's an election year, I cannot believe that either the Democrats or the Republicans want to be responsible for keeping people in the positions that they're at. The furloughed people's, their payments are about to expire. A lot of the loan moratorium is about to expire. And as you said, they're expecting now maybe another 850,000 people to claim joblessness when the numbers come out tomorrow. Do you want to be on that side when you're trying to politicize and become president and take over potentially from a red Senate to a blue Senate? I think they'll pass it. It's just going to be basically who decides to cave more and when.
With that, Mish, let's move to the election and markets. The stimulus package and how it's going to be repaid will certainly be a talking point. How impactful do you think the election is going to be to the markets, or is it really about the shape of the economy when the new term starts that matters?
I'd say both. In terms of the economy, people are sort of forgetting, I think, that even before pandemic hit, we were really still seeing two economies. We were seeing a big rally in tech, but the inside factors of the market, being the small caps, the transportation, the brick and mortar retail, they have been floundering for years. So in terms of the expectation for the economy, one has to ask what really has to happen at this point. And considering we're trying to break from China without a real plan to supplant the manufacturing and the cheap cost of goods that they do, it's hard to see the economy doing better, whether it's going to be a Republican or a Democratic, for some time. And especially since we've done some damage here, we've created a huge amount of debt. We actually have now more debt than our economy is worth, which is something Japan had suffered with and still suffers with. So that, to me, is going to be a dilemma for either side that wins. I think the biggest thing that's going to come out of the election really is this whole notion of civil unrest. I'm not saying one person versus the other will stop it, but I think the perception, depending on who wins, might be really impacting what happens with all of this social unrest, which of course I think will turn out to become more and more a factor of the wealth inequality that we have in this country.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Let's go back to U.S.-China trade tensions for a minute, because those are starting to peak again as well. What are you watching there?
Well, a couple of things. China has already started to reduce the amount of bonds that it's buying, and it's the second largest holder of U.S. bonds behind the United States. So that's something that we need to keep an eye on. That's a retaliatory factor that could really hurt us. Secondly, they're talking also about reducing their exposure to the U.S. dollar, and the digital yuan is starting to have some level of competition to the dollar. As we know, the dollar has fallen a lot over the last year, this 2020, and still remains weak. So I think what China can really do in terms of hurting us would be our bond and our dollar problem. And so, this is really something we have to keep an eye on. Now, whether it's just idle threats, we don't know, but this was really been going on for a while. We've talked in the past about the idea of the US as the world's reserve currency. That would be disastrous. But probably the biggest thing that's coming out of the China US, besides obviously the hit to manufacturing, et cetera, would be what China's saying their concern is, which is inflation, which I would actually say a little bit differently. I would say more as stagflation, which is where the price of goods go up, but the economy stagnates.
All right, and to wrap here, how confident are you in a vaccine rolling out in the fourth quarter? And of course, how does that impact the investment thesis? There seems like there's just so many outliers out there.
Yes, absolutely, there are. Well, I think the hit today, the reality check, so to speak, of what happened with AstraZeneca, AZN, that it's not so easy to have a vaccine, that it could have some detrimental impact. And then on top of that, you have the distribution problem, even if they do get a vaccine. I don't see one coming really very soon. And then on top of that, even if they get through all of that and somebody does come out with something that isn't hurting people and actually helping people, then we have the anti-vaccine movement that started again before the pandemic. So I think the market will at some point have to divorce itself from pandemic, and that's not going to be a vaccine. That's going to be that we don't get some really insidious second wave coming up as the weather turns colder.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Mish, thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you, Jill, for having me.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.